Hello and welcome to another macro video. Today a slightly unusual title, Why I Don't Use Macros. But as you'll probably guess, that doesn't refer to me. That refers to one of my colleagues, my fellow member of the Chartered Institute of Editing and Proofreading. She gave me her honest views about macros. She said that she'd tried to use Fredit a few years ago. Indeed, she went on a couple of courses that I ran, but now she hardly uses any macros. Oh dear. So to try to address this, I want to get you to understand my background with macros, and then having done that, we'll look at the specific issues that she raises, and these issues may be ones that other people might share. So for me, it's been a gradual process of learning about macros. So first I had to learn about macros for myself because I'd never come across them before. Then I had to develop the macros. Then I tried and failed to teach others. Well, some were successful, but not everyone. Then I gradually learnt more and more techniques as the years rolled by. And eventually I developed an installation process, which I call the Macro Starter Pack, to make it easier for people to get started. So here's we're going to start with a sort of historical perspective, so you can see where I'm coming from. So in 2005, so 15 years ago, I joined the CIEP, Chartered Institute of Editing and Proofreading, and at that stage I had never used Word before. I didn't know what a macro was, and I hadn't done any freelance editing. Okay, I'd done editing and proofreading for myself because for 20 years before that I had run a monthly magazine, a subscription magazine that I did everything. It was my magazine, I published it. But doing editing for other people is a very different matter. At that sort of stage, the CIEP had pioneering trainers who were trying to get people to do on-screen editing, and they were trying to persuade people not to edit on paper. So that's 2007. Now I didn't realise then, but I was in really quite a weird position. The reason is that I started using a Fredit type software, in other words, scripted global find and replace, in 1990 on other computer systems, on things called Acorn computers. So for 15 years I'd been using scripted global find and replace. I just assumed that was the norm. So I got started in editing, so I looked around for the global find and replace scripted. Nothing available. So I got somebody I knew from the Acorn field who could write macros for Word, and he wrote a thing called that I call pre-edit, but it was difficult to use. I gradually wrote a few small macros as I learnt about the programming, and eventually wrote Dockerlize. That was my first analysis program, and 2008 roundabout, I wrote Fredit, which was much easier to use. As I got more and more skilled with macros, I wrote more and more macros, and in around about 2010 I started to try and teach people about using Fredit, but I wasn't 100% successful. And even at that stage I still had no idea how new even global find and replace was to a lot of people, let alone scripted global find and replace. So 10 years later, where are we at? Let's have a look at my colleague's specific issues. And I should say this is an extremely experienced editor, not somebody who's just started up. I've paraphrased her comments just to make it shorter and easier. When I tried Fredit, that was in 2010, my laptop came up with error messages even under your supervision. Oh dear. After helping various different people on different computers, including Macs, I would say that the macros are now more robust. So hopefully things are better than they were in 2010. Second point, well, there's two parts to it. Talking about Fredit, I was worried that if I didn't highlight the changes, I'd miss some, and I'd also misinterpret the author's intended meaning. But if I used highlight, they would distract me. Well, yes, I agree about the highlights distracting, and Fredit is now more flexible, and you can use font colouring and not just highlighting, which is what I use instead of highlighting, because it's less intrusive, so I can look at the sentence and I will know that something has been changed, but I will be able to concentrate on the meaning and flow of the sentence as I look at it without being distracted. Talking about the book, she says, I feel overwhelmed by the sheer number of macros, and when I search for a macro I can't find what I want. Well, yes, I agree. Over 750 macros is way too many, and I'm afraid I don't really have an answer. However, I would say that it's okay to ask me. I don't mind people emailing me and saying, is there a macro that does so and so? If there is, then it's easy enough to point you to the macro in the book. If it's not, then you'll set my creative juices flowing, and I'll want to create a new macro just for you because I enjoy it. And obviously you can ask on editors forums. People have been reticent to do that in the past because there hasn't been an entirely positive attitude towards macros, because people didn't realize that macros weren't just those things you record. They didn't realize quite how big the idea of a macro was. So yes, so ask me, is there a macro that does so? Ask me or ask on the groups, is there a macro? Okay, so my colleague was asking, I appreciate that your division of macros into analytic ones where there's no changes made, at the cursor changes, and global changes, and you said it was a chainsaw. Well, yes, I did actually, but I'm not even using the analytical ones, she confesses. Well, I'm sorry that I scared you off. I used to say of Fredit that chainsaws can do a lot of work quickly, but they're dangerous. So I was trying to avoid you thinking that you could just go straight in and use Fredit, and you know, didn't want people to end up making a mess. So I perhaps overdid the warning messages that I gave by talking about Fredit as a chainsaw. They can be dangerous, yes, global changes, but as long as you start slowly and gradually gain confidence, you'll be fine. So don't try and do too much too soon, but just take it slowly. But she says, I still feel overfaced by the complexity of the whole concept. Well, yes, I'm really sorry about that. I don't honestly have an answer to that. What we need is proper training courses. I know that CIEP are working on it, but it does take time because the courses have to be online courses, and writing an online course is extremely difficult. And the other factor, I'm afraid, is that yeah, it's my fault, I know. Macros are developing all the time, and you set up a course that CIP did set up a course 3 or 4 years ago, which is fine, but it needs updating because it's out of date. Things have moved on, and they're working on it, but not yet. And I'm not the best trainer, I'm afraid, so you know, I don't expect me to do it. Underneath all this, she says, I'm still deeply concerned about macros mucking up the precious book I'm working on. Well, yes, okay, that is very important, but that's what in 2007 editors were saying about doing on-screen editing even. They had to be persuaded to stop doing paper editing because it was, you know, they thought it was all too dangerous. But we need to get educated if we're not to be left behind, especially the younger people coming through into the editing field. They are used to expecting apps for this and apps for that. Well, apps are macros, or macros are apps. These days you want to do something, then is there an app for it? Is there a macro for it? So as older folks, we'll get left behind if we don't get educated, but it's not as easy as that, I realise. Again, we need more trainers and more training, and I'm afraid I have no other solution than that. That's really what we need. But remember that we've got the Macro Starter Pack, which is a relatively easy way to get you started. There are loads of videos. This is going to be video number 132 or something, I can't remember now. And if you pester your professional bodies around the world, ask them, please can we have some more macro training? But training is not my forte, so it's not me that you should be asking for training, it's other people. It's macro development work that's my real strength. We're a team, so each of us should play to their strength, and together we can do this, folks. So that's it for today. If you have any queries, feel free to email me, and hang on in there, and together we'll beat the virus, and together we'll get the macros going. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.